I spent a couple of weeks in a county jail. On the first day, when we were all being processed into the facility, where we had to strip, bend over, spread your cheeks, and cough, we were told very succinctly to never ever even joke about suicide while in the facility. It's kinda like how you just don't say the word bomb anymore on an airplane. By day 3, I had a good understanding of the other guys I was locked up with. I was physically the biggest of the white guys in our quote pod, so all the white kids huddled around my table at meals to keep away from the Hispanic folks and the black folks. Yeah, there are 3 teams in a correctional facility, whether you like it or not. There was one kid in the group that seemed underdeveloped mentally. He probably had a learning disability among other things, but he essentially acted like a 12-year-old. I knew early on that he was going to get himself in trouble because he never stopped talking or moving, and he was just rubbing everyone the wrong way. I tried to tell him to chill out and be invisible, but he was just not understanding what I was telling him. I had been there a week when the quote 12-year-old finally lost his cool completely. He was in the shower, singing and joking around and putting on a performance that went way too far, and he ended up pooping on the floor as a joke. After the other guys in the shower grabbed their towels and ran, he proceeded to kick the poop all over the walls and into the other shower stalls. It turned into a big scene, and then when the trustees came in to clean the poop all over the walls, it turned into an even bigger scene. The whole time, this kid was locked in a cell near the showers, just laughing and joking as other inmates had to clean up his poop and make the shower area sanitary again. State-run facilities have standards after all. The next day, everyone was looking at this kid with hate in their eyes. Everyone else missed their showers the day prior due to this incident, and the kid was still up to his antics at breakfast the next day. Everyone got really cold toward him and openly mean. I'll admit, I even started ignoring him after this incident. It took him a day or two to realize that he was hated by all, and then his personality changed dramatically. He became sad, despondent, and started talking to the COs because the other inmates wouldn't talk to him anymore. He fucked up and told the COs that he should just harm himself and make everyone happy, and that was all it took. They dragged out the blue burrito. This is the scariest thing I had seen in jail. The blue burrito was a 10-foot-long blue foam mat, like one you would use in gym class, with 2 other 12-foot-long red belts attached. They laid it out on the floor and forced this kid to lay on the mat, and then they rolled it up with his arms at his sides into the blue burrito. The 2 long red belts clipped together at the top and the bottom, keeping it all nice and tight. This was the suicide protocol at the jail. No counseling, no medical ward. You lose the ability to move. They put that poor bastard into the burrito around 8 p.m. They dragged him into his cell and left him laying there on the floor wrapped up tight until breakfast the next morning at around 8 a.m. Imagine being unable to move, barely able to breathe, with no end in sight for 12 hours on the floor of your 8x8 cell. My cell was above his, and I heard him weeping and moaning in agony all night. He didn't say a word to anyone, or look at anyone in the eye for that matter, for the rest of the time that I was there. One night, and the blue burrito broke him. Not me, but my husband was in a prison as a young adult. He said that they had a way of, quote, checking your ego in the spot that he was at. The toughest guys would come up to you on your first day and ask how many push-ups you could do. If you were smart, you would just sort of blow it off, laugh, and move on. If you were a stupid show-off, though, or felt like you had something to prove by claiming a large number and talking yourself up, they would be all friendly and be like, "Oh, let's see it then." So, those poor idiots would do as many push-ups as they could. The tough guys would gas the new guy up, acting friendly, pushing him to do more. They acted impressed and joked around, and then as soon as the new guy had done as many push-ups as possible, they would jump him and beat him up. He would be completely helpless to resist because he had maxed himself out on push-ups. Afterwards, any guy with an ego was normally really quiet for the remainder of the stay. When I was 20 years old, I thought I wanted to be a correctional officer. One night I was sent to work at the medical ward where each inmate had their own isolated cell where they were let out twice a day. That night I was going around with a nurse giving the inmates their medicine, and we came to one inmate's cell, and as soon as we opened the door, I was knocked back by the most putrid smell I have ever smelt in my life. I've been to the dump plenty of times in my life, and it was nothing in comparison to the smell that inmate had going on. Once we were done giving out the medicine, I went up to the officer training me and asked him what the hell was going on with that inmate and why he smelled so god-awful. He said, "Oh, you met Grady? He shits and pisses himself on purpose. He never changes or showers, so he consistently lives in his own filth. I eventually found out that he was raped once in prison, so he started shitting and pissing himself so he wouldn't be raped anymore. My cellmate was truly crazy and was completely tortured by hallucinations. One day he managed to gouge out one of his own eyes with a fork at lunch in front of everyone. Then he punctured the other eye with something before the screws could get to him. He was screaming like a banshee when he ripped the first one out and threw it on the floor. Everyone just stared in shock, including the screws. At first, it looked like a skid or something. After the first one was out, he went really quiet, pulled something from his waist and started rapidly stabbing the other eye with it. I heard it pop. By that time, a couple of screws were already just about on him and they took him down. I never saw him again after that, but I heard he was completely blinded. So quite a few of us never finished that lunch. Some of us even got counseling because it was so violent and shocking. I still remember a screw picking up the eye with a clear plastic bag while we were all being filed out. The violence was nothing compared to the people. The guy who taught me Scrabble beat his wife to death with a frying pan when he discovered his gambling debts. The guy who taught me poker tied up his employer in his house, and when the boss refused to give him the combo to his safe, the guy just burned the house down with the boss still tied inside. I worked out with a guy who was caught with 2 arms and 1 leg in his trunk. He was in an Asian gang, had just performed a hit and was bringing the evidence back to his people for proof when he was pulled over. His co-defendant was snitching, so he spent literally all of his time working out to kill the guy the second he got the chance. Before I got shipped to prison, yeah, these were all in county jail, he finally got his shot and essentially ripped the guy's face off in the middle of a hallway in front of guards. He was a huge fuck-up on the cops' part, to the point where it was rumored it was the gang that paid to make sure the snitch died. You live with these people. Play cards, gamble, watch sports. If you're locked in your cell for a big game, you listen on your radios together and talk shit through the hatches in your doors. On Wednesdays, your chicken quarter is going to go together on a huge homemade meal for whoever wanted to chip in, and it's going to be made by the 22-year-old Crip who's been charged with 9 separate murders and is seemingly the nicest person you'll ever meet. It's fucking wild. Nothing makes sense and everything's dangerous. You're in this together, but at the same time, everyone has all sorts of rage just ready to blow. I had an aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, as well as a separate case of unlawful possession of a firearm, so I had the pleasure of going to max units. Interestingly enough, the threat of constant danger actually helped things stay calm the vast majority of the time. Everyone's a killer, no one wants to be killed type vibes. I got stabbed with a Dixon pencil, but that was from Richard Busby, Mr. Tie My Boss Up and Burn Him Alive. It was over a gambling debt that he owed me. He's old and weak and I ultimately took twice what he owed me, and we were back at the table playing poker together the same day. Google his name if you'd like. I believe he just had an appeal denied or some shit. Either you become one of them, or you live underneath them. And once you're one of them, they're surprisingly and frighteningly good-natured and decent to kill a few years' time with. Not myself, but my friend did 7.5 years at a notoriously violent prison. I'm just going off memory now, but there is a canteen area you go and buy things. You can only go at certain hours of the day or something like that. They have inmates called PCs, or protective custody. Usually they're criminals who are pedophiles. Anyway, to get to the canteen, you have to do a walkthrough of a hallway that has security doors on both ends. The other end is the canteen just past the door. PCs were only allowed to go to the canteen at specific times for their own safety. I can't remember why exactly, but this one time they had to go with the general population. The PCs had to walk through this long hallway with them. During the walk, suddenly the prison went into lockdown. All the doors locked in the prison, including the doors behind them and in front of them. I don't remember if they said that there was a security guard there or not, but either way it didn't matter. There was no way for the PCs to escape, and the general population inmates took their opportunity and beat the living hell out of the PCs in this lockdown hallway. There were several injuries and even one death. My friend wasn't a part of the brutality, but they were knocking out teeth and breaking their fingers. They were laughing as they told them to pick up their teeth with broken fingers, making them eat their own or each other's blood, and even stripped them down naked and pissed on them. One PC was beaten so bad he went into a coma and passed away only a day later. Others had broken legs and arms, etc. What troubled me quite a bit was my friend telling me how much blood there was everywhere. It stained the floors and the walls, and so it got the nickname from then on, Blood Alley. I remember him telling me every time he went to the canteen he would basically relive the situation. I guess that's the story that horrified me enough to remember specific details. I work in jails across the country. There are many unsettling moments, violence between inmates, suicide, psychosis. I remember trying to teach a nurse one day, and an inmate kept screaming at me, "Put your eyeballs back in your head, bitch! They're rolling around on the floor." But the moment that sticks out by far to me, one day I was helping a doctor. When she's helping her patients, I try to stay out of the room, so that way I'm not interfering with her work. For some reason though, that specific patient that she was working with's head stuck out in my mind before. Though I see hundreds a day during MedPass when I follow a nurse from cell to cell, I specifically remember seeing this man. He was relatively young and very polite, which is what stuck out to me the most. He always said, "Hello ma'am, how are you? Thank you, please, etc." I even remember looking at the chart to see what his name was, and I rarely remember names. I actually feel it's better not to. Anyway, I'm standing in the hallway outside of the doctor's office when another patient who is sitting on the bench waiting to be seen says to me, "Stay away from that guy, he's a crazy motherfucker." I laughed because it was one inmate telling me to stay away from another inmate. I don't even let anybody stand behind me or within 5 feet of me. My laughing changed his tone though, and he got a lot more serious, his voice raised in intensity. "No, I'm serious. Stay away from that motherfucker. He is crazy." Okay, point taken. I nod my head, and in that moment I'm thankful for the COVID mask that hides my reaction. Not a moment later, the corrections officer comes waltzing down the hallway swinging his keys in his hand and whistling. Oh, hey, that's Body Bag Lag. The name was changed slightly for privacy. My eyes immediately widened. I googled him later. That man had a girlfriend, and she got pregnant. She didn't let him see the baby when it was born, and he wanted custody. He and his family, his mom, dad, and brother, planned and successfully executed all 10 members of her family. Anyone who could possibly get the baby before he would receive custody. And maybe I'm misunderstanding, but I think it worked. I believe he had custody of the kid for a while, until he himself came forward and confessed and threw his whole family under the bus and accepted his punishment. I think he got super religious or something, or maybe the guilt got to him. I remember his cell always had like 100 crosses taped to the walls. I've had scarier moments in jail, whole cells having to go into lockdown because they see a girl working. Lots of people jerk off at you. But Body Bag Lag will always stick out to me. I spent over 5 years in our state's maximum security prison. One day during my first month there, I went to walk from my cell on the 3rd floor down onto Flag. There's a landing area in the middle with sets of stairs on either side, and in the landing I see 3 guys tussling, so I just waited out. One guy has a canteen bag in his hand. Canteen is where you buy toiletries and food in prison. You fill out an order sheet, and in a couple of days you go to another area and pick up your stuff. They issue these mesh nylon bags that you can bring and fill up with your goods to carry back, and these bags are surprisingly tough. Also, at that time, they still sold some foods in cans, like chili and a couple of different kinds of veggies. So the dude swings this canteen bag with what looked like to be cans in it at the other guy, and he goes down. The 2 others scamper back on a cell on their tier, and I didn't see at first where the other guy who got hit went. I let a few minutes pass and I head down. When I get to the landing, there's a huge pool of blood, like feet across, most blood I've seen in my life. The 3rd guy's on the ground making some weird moaning sounds, and his foot is kinda twitching. He looks hurt, bad, and I was definitely frightened. The dude's sort of rolling back and forth, and I have to literally step over him. More of a hop, really, to avoid stepping on the blood. Later, after I do my business on Flag, which was cooking some food in the microwave, and head back up, the guy's still laying on the landing. I ask a guy in a cell near me if I should casually mention it, like point it out to a guard that someone's hurt, just so they take notice and get him some medical attention. It was the last time I ever bothered asking a question like that. The answer, obviously, was no. I've got handfuls of stories from those 6 years. I'm not a prisoner, but an ex-guard. I worked at a juvenile detention facility in New Mexico. The absolute scariest thing I ever saw was a young boy, about 9 years old, booked in for murdering both of his parents. There was nothing there. I failed to call this thing even human. I looked into this child's eyes and felt more fear than I ever have to this very day. This was no child, it was a monster. Pure evil, condensed and given human form. And to clarify, I've booked and looked after murder suspects before, it was nothing new. But this kid was different. Very different. He never broke any rules and always followed commands, but never ever spoke unless directly asked something. And then it was curt, short, just to answer the question. He never cried either, which is highly unusual for a 9-year-old kid in jail. He was eventually tried and transferred to a mental facility, but I'll never forget that kid's eyes. It haunts me to this day. Not me, but I spoke to a former inmate after his release who had developed severe PTSD from some of the things he had witnessed while incarcerated. One of the stories was that he was playing cards with some guys, and one of them was smoking a cigarette. Another inmate who was not playing with him approached the table and asked the guy smoking if he could get, quote, shorts on the cigarette. Shorts meant, before you finished smoking, you gave the cigarette to someone else so that they got the last few puffs of the cigarette before putting it out. The smoker agreed, and the inmate wandered off and they went back to playing cards. Well, the guy playing cards must have forgot and finished the cigarette. A little while later, the other inmate came back to the table asking for the short, and the guy at the table told him that he had forgotten about it and finished the cigarette. The guy wanders off again, and they go back to playing cards. Shortly afterwards, the inmate who wanted shorts comes back to the table, comes up behind the player, pulls his head back and started shanking him in the eye and throat with a pen/pencil. The dude died over forgetting to give someone else a damn cigarette butt.